Welcome back to another episode of The Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century. My name is Kendall, and I am thrilled to bring you today's guest, Robert Bemis. So I'm going to let Robert introduce himself and tell you what he does in life, because Robert, you do so many things. I would never be able to list them all.
Got a strange skill set, yeah. I work for the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and I am the Historic Trades Interpretive Specialist, which is a bit of a mouthful. Essentially, what that means is that if you take the sites that we have, every site that has a structure there, every site that has people who were involved with the structure, they did something. And it's my responsibility not only to look at the people who actually perform tasks, perform trades, but to develop those trades to better teach the interpretive staff as well as the public. I've had to, over my 20-year career, just about get good at every historic trade.
Yeah, I would
or at least
imagine.
know something about it. At least know enough to converse with it. By no far stretch of the imagination have I mastered any of them. But
do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite, and do you have a least favorite?
Oh, that is really dictated by time of the year. Primarily, my two major ones, the two major that I do, are blacksmithing and woodworking. I love to do both. Mostly blacksmithing. I teach at a place here in Raleigh. I live in Raleigh, actually a little east of Wendell, North Carolina, and I teach at a local arts center called Shop Space. And I get my fill of blacksmithing there, both modern and 18th and 19th century. But my home shop, as you can see a little bit in the back, is woodworking. I primarily do woodworking at home. But I also, it's on my household schedule. Every 2 months, we make soap and mayonnaise in an 18th century fashion, or 19th century here at the house. Leather work, a little bit of sewing, but that's the only thing. That's the one thing when it comes to reenactors, is that you can often tell the measure of a reenactor by his ability to tailor. Well, that's one of the few that I never quite got great at.
Yeah.
So, but I have a great excuse though. I have a really good excuse.
What's
you
your
can tell by
excuse?
the thickness of the glasses. It's very difficult for me to do.
Yes,
I'm a big motion guy.
That's true. That makes sense. I think it's fair. As long as you have friends who can do it for you, people you can buy stuff from.
Exactly.
That's how I'm rolling. That's how it's working for me.
You don't need to know everything. You just need to know somebody who does it, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's my favorite advice for people who are new to this. So we have a lot to cover and talk about today. But before we get into that, I want to do what I always do at the beginning of The Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century. And I'd love to hear your journey, how you got into living history, how this all started for you.
Okay. Well, wow. So it started way back when I was 5 or 6 years old. And my father was in the 82nd Airborne. And so I kind of sort of halfway grew up in Fort Bragg just from going there often. And we went to the PX on base when you used to be able to go on base. And Dad bought me a tiny version of a uniform. Well, it was a little kid's uniform, but it was brilliant. It was brilliant. Only recently, because of some other reenacting stuff, that we realized that the helmet that we bought, it's probably 1977, 1978, was actually World War II vintage. It was beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful. Yeah, have had that refurbished since. But Dad bought me the uniform, and I was into it. I was always that kid. Now, in saying that probably lasted until I was 11 or 12, and then the artsy-fartsy side of Bob Bemis came out. And I was the art kid in high school, so people my age would understand it best by saying that, I was the Ally Sheedy from Breakfast Club.
Yes.
That was me.
Yeah.
And that lasted all the way through really until today. But way back in the early 90s, I went to UNCC for my visual arts degree. Well, at that point in time, I became a graphic designer and all this, but I had very good friends who were miniature war gamers. I've been a comic book gaming guy my entire life, and I was really into miniature war gaming, specifically historic miniature war gaming. And that's all I did, is I researched uniforms. I researched the miniatures. I painted them. You can kind of see where the overlap occurred there.
Yes, yes.
So this was, maybe 94, 95. And a very, very good friend of mine, Dr. John Cohn from Central Piedmont Community College, he says to me one day, Bob, we were actually in Gettysburg at the time. Myself and a group of friends used to go to Gettysburg for a miniature wargaming convention, and then one of us would research something and take the other ones onto the battlefield, and we would take a tour, and somebody would always curate a battlefield tour. So he sits me down, he's like, go back to school. Go back to school and get your history degree. I was like, okay, I think that sounds like a plan. So I did, and went back to school, got my history degree, got my master's in history from both of them from UNCC, a lifelong Charlottean, and knew that I wanted a career in the history field. Primarily, I was probably going to teach. That was kind of where I had decided. So way back when, about 2000, my fiance and I at the time, we go to the Charlotte Museum of History to have some photographs taken. Out by the Hezekiah Alexander House, we were going to have some wedding photos taken. So we decided to take the tour. Now I'm in school for history. I had not quite yet got to the point where I was dressing up. And we took the tour. I got through with it. I turned to my wife and I said, I can do better than that. And immediately volunteered, walked up to the counter, volunteered, and started the world of historic living history. Now,
Wow.
saying that, my living history career and my reenacting career have kind of walked hand in hand. I came at this primarily as a teacher of history who then decided to reenact rather than a reenactor who then decided to get a job in the field. So I fell in with a unit that I met in South Carolina, at Camden, strangely enough, the 7th Regiment of Foot. This was, about 18 years ago. And this was right around when the 225th happened a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
And during the 225th, I met some of my very best friends still today. And the way I met them is I walked up to them and I said, what's wrong with my uniform? I'm that guy. If I'm going to do something, I'd like to do it right.
Right.
At least as right as possible, at least as right as I can do it. And my now good friends, they look at me and they say, do you really want to know? To which I answer, yes. And they point out that from head to toe, everything that I was wearing was wrong.
Wow.
Now, this could have gone two ways. This could have gone a way that I would have gone whatever and just left and never have done anything with it. Or it could have gone the way it went. The way it went, I just so happened to have met that day Carl Johnson, whom you have interviewed.
Yes. Yep.
So he says to me, well, you have a decision. You can either continue doing what you're doing and have a good time with it, or give me a call. And it so happened that he lived about 15 minutes from my house, really probably about a 15-minute bike ride. And I started going over and hanging out with Carl and involving myself more in the reenacting community, more so than in the living history. So military was not really kind of where I was starting when I started my journey. It was more education. And then I fell into the military, did that. I don't know, up the road now, I'm still doing it. But for the past 10 years or so, my focus, my main focus has not so much been the military aspect of reenacting, more so than it has been the civilian and trades. I like creating. I mean, if I have a day where I can create something, that I've had a great day. And honestly, having had many conversations with people from different time periods, that's why I tend to find myself drawn toward the 18th and 19th century. When you're beginning to get into 20th and 21st century, there's just not as much stuff to make, unfortunately.
Right.
You
That's
know,
true.
I just, sometimes it looks good, sometimes it looks bad. It's okay. But I've also, and I'm going to attribute this to the art training, is if there's one thing you learn when you go to art school, it's to develop a thick skin, because criticism is constant. That's what happens.
Yes.
Criticism in the right manner. You know, constructive criticism, wonderful. You know, just somebody saying, "Oh, this is horrible." What are you gonna do about that? You know. But if somebody says that's not as good as it could be, let me help you either, show you how to do it or put you in the direction that's going to do it. That's fabulous. And so I've tried as best as I could throughout my career to live by that tenet and really help and teach as many people as possible. So I'm happy to say that I can think of quite a few people who are currently in the museum profession that I met when they were maybe not even in high school, and they're still doing it. And I would like to think that somewhere in there, me helping them, saying, me being that positive personality they met early on, helped them achieve that dream.
Yeah. So. There's so much there. There is so much. You have such a viewpoint, a vantage point that so many people don't get to have as this person who's been in museums for a long time. And then you have this reenacting piece, and then being able to mentor and help people along their journeys. And especially now being in the role that you're in, where you affect and interact with so many people at so many different sites. I don't think you mentioned, is it like 27 sites? Yeah. So
it's a lot.
Huge. It is a lot. So often, since I've started the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century and in the YouTube channel and the membership site and workshops and all of those things, people ask all the time, how do I get into this? What do I do? Right. And my journey, I started out on a board, not even dressing up, just on a board volunteering for a museum. Sure. And then I was like, well, I want to wear the clothes. Yeah. And moving into that, and then realized really didn't want to be giving tours. That wasn't for me. That's not my, finding my place in it. What did I enjoy? And then getting into reenacting and really loving reenacting.
Now, Kendall, I have to be honest with you. I find it hard to believe that giving a tour would not be your thing.
Right. I don't know. I know. It's so like, I literally have talked for a living my entire adult life, but even before I was an adult, but I know. I don't know. I think it's because I'm just stuck in one place for too long. It's too,
there's ways around that.
But let's talk a little bit, since you have so much experience in helping people either get into this as a career, which oh my gosh, that's a whole thing. It's such a complicated world to navigate professionally, especially in the museum world. And I say that as, the vice president of a historic site. And then this other side of like somebody who's like, oh, I want to get into living history. Do I go to a museum? Do I reenact? What do I do? Because I know that there's a school of thoughts. It's like, just go find a group. I wouldn't have even known how to find a group. I'd never even been to an event. So right. I didn't even know that was a possibility.
Well, and what I found, if you're going to take that route, which is a viable route, it's kind of like buying a large appliance or a new car. You don't just run to the dealership and pick out the first car you see. You do a little bit of price comparison, you look around, you do a little bit of, social media sleuthing, kind of figure out if these are the people that you want to spend a lot of time with. I was just recently having a conversation about how much of my life I've dedicated to dressing in old-timey uniforms. It's a lot, and I know people that have been doing it much, much longer than me, who do it much, much more often than me. But it's an important aspect of it that you're going to have to click. And I think the one thing that scares people the most when they're approaching groups is the idea of permanency.
Yeah.
If I go to a group and I fall in with them for 2 or 3 events and we're just not, the personalities aren't meshing, somebody's going to get their feelings hurt if I leave. We as humans don't necessarily want to do that. We try to be empathic people, especially when we're around the others that we're going to have to address. That can be hard. So the way that I've looked at that, and in various roles that I've had as volunteer coordinators and program coordinators at different museums, was that I always felt that individuals were much more comfortable if I could offer them a safe space, i.e. the museum, the historic site. Mm-hmm. They could work for us, volunteer for us, I have to say. Volunteer for us. I would put them on the correct path for our particular mission, and then have groups come to them. Mm-hmm. So, let's just use Latta Plantation as an example. What was prior to the situation that we're currently in? What would be the big 18th century event you'd be having right now?
I would be managing Rev War, which would happen, our Rev War weekend, which would happen Labor Day. Because we're a 19th century site anyway, typically we don't do a lot of 18th century stuff, but that would be the big 18th century thing we would do.
So you have an individual that volunteers for the museum. They talk to you, they get basic information from you. Mm-hmm. They are given a simple task on that day. So we need you to hang out over by the livestock and tell people about the importance of livestock to an 18th, 19th century family. obviously you're going to have to find somebody who has an interest in that, who wants to do it, that kind of thing. No problem. Let's just assume that they've found something that piques their interest. What they now have is, rather than having to do some social media sleuthing or driving 2 hours or 3 hours to a different site or to a different event and going from camp to camp to camp to camp to try to find something that they like, all those units now come to them.
Right.
They're coming to the site. Now, you may obviously not get all the units that they might be interested in, which is fine. You don't necessarily need to stay with the same unit, obviously. But what you do have is you have the option to interact with people as the investor into an organization, rather than somebody who is going in blind.
Yeah.
Now, what I find very important is when you consider the idea of joining a unit, units have identities. Obviously, they have a unit identity. Some are known as the party unit, and some are known as the old fogey unit, and sit around the fire and don't have any fun. That's my unit. Now, I kid. So, those aside, what people have to understand is that when they join an organization that has an identity, the organization you're not adopting the organization's identity. The organization is adopting your identity. You are a part of that cog now. You're just you're another part of it. So somebody who, shows up, who's brand new, who has enthusiasm, that's always great. 2 years down the road, they might be the unit leader. They might be a sergeant if there's military. They might be the person who is driven enough to take over some of the responsibilities and duties that you never knew. Now, in saying that, what I find is that sometimes these small talents that exist in people that it's hard to kind of drag out of them, it's going to be a lot easier to drag those small talents out of them if they're given an opportunity to address those talents without having some kind of pre-existing condition from a unit, i.e. volunteer at a site. I tend to push that because I've seen it work successfully so many times over the past 2 decades. Now, the one site that really comes to mind, and only because I was there for a very long time, and it really, it resulted in a large growth in me, the people that I worked with, and I like to think the people that I taught, because I'm still being contacted by them 5 years after I left, and that was historic Brattonsville. Wonderful place, upstate South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a big site, really big.
It's a big site.
It's
a big site.
For the South. Yeah, for the South.
750 plus acres.
Right.
18th century plantation, 19th century plantation. It's a big site.
Yeah.
But in saying that, outside of the sheer acreage, what they offer in a fairly, a little bit larger capacity is not too far removed than what's offered at Ladder Plantation. There's a lot of overlap there. There's a lot of overlap between just basic house museums. You go to a smaller museum, one that I used to work for, the Gaston County Museum of Art and History. It's a single structure. Well, for the most part, there's an outbuilding, but it's a 1850s hotel. But there's still a lot of overlap. Things that you can learn, trades that you can learn, activities that you can learn, ways to present yourself that you can learn at a museum, and then translate that into living history is very beneficial for the individual who's first trying to get into it. I've been lucky enough to have to deal with a lot of compare and contrast, which is great. It's really wonderful. But to then take that and translate that to a reenacting setting is significantly different. I'm no longer surrounded by history. I'm surrounded by, and I hate to say it, but as somebody who's put reenactments on for years, you really have to take care of the photos you're taking, because there's going to be a porta potty in the background at some point in time, right? Which takes you right out of your history trip, right? I'm making a joke there, but you really kind of have to think about who you're portraying, why you're portraying, and are you doing it all the time? As a living history professional, as somebody who does it in a museum all the time, 8 to 5 every day, that's what they're doing. They're in that role. If not necessarily in first person, most definitely in third person, because they're in that environment.
Yeah, right.
If you are in an environment at a reenactment, more often than not, the environment is a false environment. You just said yourself, I don't have a lot of 18th century stuff at Atlanta. We do primarily 19th century. Right. You guys have done World War II there before. Then that begins to beg a whole bunch of other questions whenever you really talk about reenactment. If it didn't happen here, should we do it? Should we do it in land that looks similar to what it did? Those are all other topics.
Yeah. So much of my experience you really shared, like already being with the museum for a couple of months, and there was an event. It was not a reenactment, but it was our annual Celtic festival. So there were some regiments who were there, and I met regiments there, and I was like, oh, it was I'd like, oh, this is interesting. This looks fun. This looks cool. I want to know more about this. And already, especially because I was with the site, it was easier for me to go and talk to them. Granted, I'm very extroverted, so it's not typically a problem for me to talk to strangers. But
Yes.
I had gone to one event in between that time from starting on the board at LATA, and in between this Celtic, I'd gone to one event and saw reenactors and was very like, I'm not going to talk to them.
Right.
It can feel intimidating, especially if it's something that you're really interested in. And then you see people in there doing a good job. And, you don't know, like, am I even allowed to go talk to them? Am I bothering them? Now, as a
Sure.
person who reenacts and is used to being at events and sitting in camp and having people come over, I'm always like, come on over.
I'll tell
But
you, I'd much rather somebody be a little intimidated and not know if they should talk to me rather than rifle through my tent, which is
oh yeah, there's a line. Ooh, there's a line.
there is, there
Right,
is.
right.
But, and I think that's an aspect of the culture. And, there's certain norms that we just adopt, just like any other hobby. I mean, why do golfers dress like that? I don't know. It looks uncomfortable to me. So why, as reenactors, whenever we sit around camp, do we, for the most part, I can't say everybody, obviously, but when you think about it, there's a fire and there's a group of people sitting around it with their backs turned toward the audience.
Mm.
And so if you're approaching a group of people that are facing away from you, that are looking towards each other, that are being inclusive, it's very hard to break. Now, I'm lucky enough to where one of the reenactment units that I deal with, we've got a lot of teachers, museum professionals, a lot of people in the unit that understand that we have different jobs.
Right.
We have different responsibilities as stewards of history. Do we want to be a steward of history, or do we just want to, dress up and have fun and do that? It's a decision that your unit has to make, and not all, obviously all units don't have to make the same decision, which is a good thing. But even as an individual, I realize my responsibility as somebody who has to accept and teach and have people better understand this. And what I found is that it benefits the unit if you have somebody who addresses the audience. I like to do that. We've got guys in the unit that I know that, a lot of museum professionals that enjoy doing that. I like to talk. I can't quite figure out if I like to actually tell people stuff, or I just really like the sound of my own voice. One of the two.
So we're talking about that I have this experience starting out as a museum, getting into reenacting that way and having that comfort level of doing that. And you help a lot of people because you're with this large museum group and you interact with a lot of people, and that, people coming in, that's one way that they can learn and start to incorporate reenacting eventually. So for me, I probably wanted to be part of a museum for 2 years before I actually did it, because I was under the assumption that you needed to have all these things figured out.
Oh yeah.
Because I had a very different life and a very different career at that time. So it was just something I was really interested in. But because of the work that I was doing at that time, I was actually working in an ancestral communities. I was going to ancestral skills weekends, but a lot of really primitive skills. And I thought, oh, these things really, they still, even if they're primitive skills, they still tie in very much, 18th,
Now let me ask you, when
century.
you say primitive skills, what does primitive skills involve?
Well, even the stuff that we do now, starting fires from the things that we do.
Okay,
but this is before that. This is in my last world that was very pre-18th century, where we were talking about humans' lives, 30,000, 10,000, pre-agriculture, all of that. So I thought, well, yeah, they're doing this stuff in the 18th, 19th century communities. This would be interesting. But because I was under that impression that, I don't know why I was under that impression. I think maybe because I'd gone to a site and saw like, well, what skills do you have? And I'm like, I don't have any of that. I don't know how to weave or sew or do all these things. I assumed, well, they wouldn't want me.
Right.
And I think that's probably a regular assumption by people.
And you're absolutely correct. It really is. And that's something that people find daunting, because the museum/history world is a very strange thing, in that the assumption is you've got to be really good at it before you start it. And that's not necessarily the truth. You don't ever expect anybody to be great when they first begin. So my first question was always not, what do you do? it was always, what would you like to do?
Mhm.
You know, here's a selection of things. You know, do you like weaving? Do you like cooking? Do you like blacksmithing? Do you like, whatever, animal husbandry, whatever. I would always try to find in the person what they were interested in specifically now. Like, what is your thing now? What do you do for a living? What is something you really enjoy? Do you really like it? Do you enjoy video gaming? I've got an 11-year-old son. That's his world, is video gaming. So how can I translate that to video gaming? Well, hey, let's take a look at a game like Minecraft. You blacksmith in that. You leather work in that. Does it really take one hammer hit to make an item? It's a really wonderful tool to introduce, especially kids. Kids are wonderful with it. When you have adults, then you can do something a little bit more specific. And what I found is you're absolutely correct, is that it's that first interaction. Once you can break that ice initially, once that the individual begins to feel comfortable with who they're talking to, who is obviously a representative of the institution, who's acting as such, then if that person portrays themselves and the institution in the correct manner to the correct person, and has just a little bit of savvy about it, understanding who they're talking to, and can just read a few social clues, then in a very short order, you can find something. Now, in saying that, what I do have to say is that it's upon the individual to find the right site.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So maybe not every site's great for you. I know that there are a lot of people that I've worked with that I would say 90% of my work has involved being outside. That's hard. Yeah. That can be really hard with people. If you have some kind of debilitating issue that you can't do that, then maybe standing around an 18th century smithy is not the place for you, which is fine. I can always find something different for you. But if you really have your heart set on giving, let's say, Edwardian house tours in an air-conditioned home, that's where all the artifacts are now temperature controlled, we can find you a place, and that's, kind of like going back to the reenactment organizations. If you don't find that you are fitting in at the museum workers understand. We're here for you. We want to help you. Of course, as a volunteer, you're helping us make our staffing that much more robust, but there's a trade-off. It's not all for us. We want you to walk away from it with something as well. And if we can't offer you that trade, well then, let's find you a place that can. So if a place like, Brattonsville, it's very difficult for them to offer a, super high-end Victorian era,
right.
Downstairs, upstairs type thing.
Yeah.
Which is fine. We can find you a place. If you wanted to reenact The Patriot, well, The Patriot was filmed there, so we can definitely do a good job. Yeah.
That's right.
But, and that's the great thing about working for the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, is that, it's a little dependent on driving. We do stretch the entirety of the state.
Yeah.
But there's historic sites pretty much everywhere. It's very difficult for you to be further away than an hour and a half from at least one or two historic sites. So finding the individual something that will help them grow themselves, which in turn grows the organization, which in turn makes them that much more comfortable to approach a reenacting organization. So let's say you come work at, I'm just going to think of one of the local sites I do a lot of work with is Bennett Place, the site of the largest Confederate capitulation during the American Civil War. There's a lot we can do there. We can teach you basically anything you want to know about 19th century farm life. Anything you want to know outside of the few days where Johnson and Sherman talked and Johnson surrendered. That was a working farm, and they portray it as a working farm. And so anything you want to know there, no problem. Now, unfortunately, the case there is that, it's not super high end and there's no air conditioning in the building. So if you have a little bit of issues there, that's no problem, we can find it. But let's say you come and you work at Bennett Place, you volunteer at Bennett Place for a little while. We teach you a trade skill. We teach you something that you're interested in, that's something that you want to know. Then the next time you start approaching Civil War or mid-19th century reenactment units, be it military or civilian, you now are approaching them with a level of confidence you didn't have prior, because you have now expanded your base knowledge due to the staffing at an organization that is there for the public, and then been able to learn from the staff, not only material culture, but also trades culture. So your arsenal, your personal arsenal, has grown that much more to where you're going to be able to quickly find, in my belief at least, a unit that's going to help you either grow or adapt to you or utilize your skills to make themselves that much better.
Right. You've been reenacting for a little while now.
Yes.
Tell me several of your favorite experiences as a reenactor that you've had.
Me? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Two. I've got two favorites.
Two favorites. Okay.
Two favorites. I've been to quite a few, my share of reenactments.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, external reenactments I don't get to go to as often as I used to, and not so much because of the current situation with COVID, but because I work for the state. I do 12 to 15 reenactments-ish a year, but those are all state reenactments.
Right.
So I don't get to travel as much as I used to. But the two travels would have to be the Battle of Saratoga in New York, only because we did the Battle of Bemis Heights, and I got to tell people to get off my heights. So it was quite nice. And it was a wonderful location, you know, mid-state, upstate New York, absolutely beautiful. The time of the year was wonderful. Absolutely amazing. And then, of course, 2015, I had the pleasure of attending the 200th anniversary of Waterloo as a member of the 4th King Zone. And
well,
yeah, we actually did that in real time. We did the Battle of Bladensburg, and then went to New Orleans in January, into the Battle of New Orleans, and then we went to Belgium and fought at Waterloo.
That's pretty incredible, though. Do you have any, I know you're so busy with your job in history and living history, but do you have any upcoming plans in the future for doing anything fun or big like that again?
No. Yes, actually, it's funny because as far as like, you know, reenacting travel plans, about as much as anybody else.
Well, right now, 2020.
Yeah. But as far as like long-term things, I'm being strong-armed into doing 1745, you know, right now.
That's where I was going with that. That's where I was like, are you in the Barrels Regiment?
No, not yet. I'm holding off. It's a sad and sorry state right now, but no, it's one of those situations where the soul is willing, but the pocketbook is not. You know, I just recently went a little crazy with some hand tools, and you know, there you go. So
I'll explain what I'm referring to. As you mentioned earlier, that I had previously did a show with your friend Carl Iverson of Line of March, and just this week, your brother, who we have not mentioned yet, Joe Bemis from Victory Productions, who I also interviewed, took some beautiful, amazing shots of Carl's new uniform. Let's talk about the fact that this is like a family affair for you guys, that your brother, how does that happen? How do you end up with two siblings in a family who are so passionate about living history? Well,
it happens more than you'd think, actually. I know quite a few pair of brothers that are really into it. And it's funny that Joe and I, we come from two entirely different perspectives, but the perspectives they're more similar than they look on paper. He comes up from a very artsy background as well. I mean, he's been a photographer for the vast majority of his life. And so, you know, not speaking for him, but you know, he started shooting reenactors very early on. And it's one of those things.
Were you already involved in it when he became interested in it, or?
I had been for years.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. And you know, I'm 6 years older, so I had a little bit of leg up on it.
Right.
But no, he was interested. I think his first reenactment was probably around 2010, something like that. Yeah. And I had been in it for, you know, almost a decade at that point in time. So, but you know, that's what he did. He would always come out and take photos. And as he grew his business that way and began to hang out with more reenactors, and find something that was interested him. He's very much interested in World War II, has been his entire life, as long as I've known the child, which is literally his entire life. I'm sorry. As long as I've known the guy.
It's that big brother. It's that big brother. Yes.
Old habits die hard. So he's always had an interest in World War II, primarily World War II aviation.
His photos are stunning. They are incredible.
They
his work
really
is
are
just amazing. It's really.
I'm very, very proud of him. He does amazing work. So
he does, and he's such a great guy.
The only thing that upsets me is that at some point in time we flipped, and he went from being Bob's brother to me being his brother.
Yeah.
Gotten kind of weird now. Oh, you're Joe's brother. Yeah.
That's so great. Okay, so we'll wrap this up by quickly talking. You have an Instagram where you are showcasing some of your woodworking now, which is so fun.
Yeah, robot_Bemis. Well, and there's kind of a thing there is it's not only showcasing woodworking, there's a little bit of blacksmithing. There'll be more blacksmithing as soon as I can get back in. You'll see a little bit of all the stuff I do. I do a little bit of jewelry making, a little bit of leather working, a lot of stuff that I'm working on. But it also gives me an opportunity to show people that a working public historian can do something more than history all the time. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the image, you'll usually see something vaguely historic. If you read the image, there's always some kind of pop culture stuff there. You know, I've been an avid comic book collector since I was 11. I'm a Star Wars guy, and I'm out that age, and so huge anime fan, and so I like to make little references so that people understand that you can't. I know it sounds crazy. You can't have a life outside of history sometimes.
What? A life outside of history?
I know. I mean, it's amazing for me to think how much more, especially with clothing, how much more I'd have done if I didn't play World of Warcraft. But I do. There you go.
Everybody's got to have hobbies that aren't just history. Robert Bemis, thank you so much for being on today. I enjoyed our conversation, and you can check out, I'll have Robert's Instagram in the show notes, and I look forward to having you back again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Kendall, thank you so very much.